There we go. Thank you. Okay, so lesson 2. Again, we're going to start with question number 4. So we're talking about being heard by God in prayer. Go ahead and turn to 1 Peter in your Bibles, because we're going to look at that in just a second here. But we've been talking about circumstances in which God hears us, circumstances in which God doesn't hear us. So we looked at the beginning back in 2 Chronicles 7, where Solomon had prayed at the dedication of the temple, was praying for God to hear the people when they turned to him. God talking about humility, that they would turn to him, that they would acknowledge their ways, turn from their wicked ways. Verses in Isaiah where he was saying, they're continuing to live these sinful lives. He's not going to hear them. And then we looked at the apostles praying for boldness, how God heard them and confirmed that for them. And then we looked last week James 5 and Hebrews 5, looking at how Elijah was heard because he prayed in faith. Jesus was heard for his reverence. Okay, so we're trying to touch on those ideas, ways that we can know that we're heard by God, and ways that we can know that we're in danger of not being heard by God because of the things that we're doing. So let's look at 1 Peter. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 3. So interestingly, Peter talks 3 times in his letter in 1 Peter about things that hinder prayer. So we're going to look first at 1 Peter 3 verse 7. If anybody wants to volunteer to read that for us.
You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered.
All right. So what's something that could hinder your prayer, according to this verse?
Not living with your wife in an understanding way.
Not living with her in an understanding way, not showing her honor, right? Not recognizing that she is an heir with you of the grace of life. Basically, not doing the things that Peter says to do. Those are all things that can hinder your prayer. Practically, what's that look like? What are some specific examples of something that might hinder our prayers? Yeah.
I guess generally speaking, some married couples just kind of throw their hands up at misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And just kind of reach the conclusion that it's never going to be something that we get, so there's no sense in trying.
Yeah.
And essentially God is telling husbands, you're not allowed to give up.
Right.
Your understanding is your goal, it's your assignment, it's righteous standard. So if you think you can just live in misunderstanding, then you're fooling yourself, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
I guess in that sense, we have to work towards resolution on problems.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just ignore them. And maybe that's the easiest thing to do. We can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like if you're going to give up on your wife, I'm going to give up on you. Right? I'm not going to listen to you when you're not trying to understand and listen to your wife. Absolutely. Selfishness. Being a selfish husband, right? Isn't that kind of essentially what he's talking about here, right? You're not showing understanding. You're not showing her this honor in this way because you want what you want, right? So acting selfishly as a husband is going to stand between you and God, right? It's going to stand in the way. It's going to hinder your prayer, right? Aaron.
There's a certain sense of humility that has to be there too, as if we're going to be like Christ was and be a servant, kind of thing. So we have to lay ourselves down for the sake of our wives, and that looks a lot different than a domineering type of lording over. This is my way, and you have to do what I say, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you won't petition God either if that's your attitude.
Right.
If you don't have humility, why do you need God?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that mindset for sure. But we can't fool ourselves into thinking that I can be whatever kind of husband I want, and God's still going to listen to me, right? I think that's something Peter is calling out here. Well, no, you can't do that. You can't just behave however you want, and God's just going to keep listening to you, and your relationship with God not be impacted. A relationship with God impacted by the way we treat other people. No?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Adam said, because this word, the Greek word is being used in different contexts in the Bible, where we understand deep understanding, like knowledge of God, deep knowledge of God.
Yeah.
So it's quite religious, like what Adam said, where it's like a light understanding of it. And get one time.
Yeah, it's doing the hard work, right? It's doing the hard work in marriage to understand, to draw closer, all of those things, 100%. Interesting call out. This is the second time that we've seen marriage and prayer connected, right? So we saw that also when we were looking at where he tells the husband and wife not to separate from each other except to devote themselves to prayer. I think that's in 1 Corinthians 7. So this is the second time we've seen prayer come up in the context of marriage. And when we think about the way we think about the impact of how we treat people affecting our relationship with God, the person we impact the most, we affect the most, is our spouse, right? It's the person we're stuck with, right? And the people we're closest to, we often treat the poorest, right? Just by nature, because they can't go anywhere, right? So I can't talk that way to my boss, but I can talk that way to you because you can't do anything about it, right? That thinking that way and going down that road, God says, no, you're affecting your relationship with me now, right? I'm not going to hear you. That's standing in the way of the relationship that we're trying to build, right? Okay, so let's look over at verse 12. Look over at verse 12. Somebody read 1 Peter 3, verse 12 for us.
For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil.
Yeah. All right, so what's something else I can do to hinder my prayer? Do evil. Right? What evil? Any evil, right, yeah. Peter doesn't confine it to certain types of evil. Again, if I think that I can practice evil and then continue to maintain my relationship with God, that's not true. That's not going to work. So if I want to have a relationship with God, then I'm going to have to stop practicing evil. Right? I'm going to have to be committed to changing my life, the decisions I make.
Yeah, I think that with this passage of Scripture, the focus is particularly on speaking, on the tongue and lips that speak deceit or speak evil, and the one who doesn't seek peace. So all of that's connected with how you speak to your wife or to your husband.
Right.
If you're thinking about that from a marriage standpoint, or to anybody.
Or to anybody, absolutely.
In a general standpoint.
I can't let my speech go unrestrained and think that I can maintain my relationship with God and that God's going to continue to listen to me. Right? I'm losing my side of the relationship. And I mean, all this makes sense, right? If I have stopped listening to God, because if I'm behaving as a husband inappropriately, then I've stopped listening to God because God's told me how to behave as a husband. If I am treating other people poorly in the way that I talk to them and the words that I use, then I've stopped listening to God. Why would he keep listening to me? Right? I've already let down my side of the relationship. Why would I expect that he keep up his side? Okay, so this all makes sense the way that it's laid out here. Let's look at one more over in chapter 4 in verse 7. All right, somebody read chapter 4, verse 7.
But the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious and watchful in your prayer.
Okay. Yeah, so mine says for the sake of your prayer. So I'm taking it from hey, this is something else that could impact your prayer life, which would be what? And mine says self-controlled, be self-controlled and sober-minded. So what else could impact our prayers? Yeah, lack of self-control, right? Lack of sobriety. If I let those things go, right? If I'm not being sober-minded, right? If I'm not being self-controlled, then that's going to interfere with my prayer life, right? It's going to interfere with my relationship with God. One of the big things I really wanted to call out with this, right? Our relationship with God is affected by how we treat others. And I think that's really called out in those first two passages. How husbands treat wives and how we use our tongues, right? How we speak to other people. And if we are not, we're not managing that, right? We're not watchful of that. We're not trying to follow what God has laid out for that. Then that's going to interfere with our relationship with Him. Okay. Look at Matthew chapter 5. Go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew 5, verses 23 and 24. So see if you see a connection here with what Jesus is saying, what we've been talking about. Okay, Matthew 5, starting in verse 23. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Right? I don't leave my relationships in shambles and go to God and expect that everything's going to be okay. Jesus says, no, you need to make it right first. The way you treat other people is going to affect our relationship. It's going to affect our relationship with God. It's going to affect God hearing us. So it's not it's not just a me and God thing. Right? God's considering the other things that are going on in my life. Right? We know this in particular. We talk about forgiveness. What's God say about forgiveness? Yeah. We're going to be forgiven as we forgive. Okay? So God's taking that into consideration. But as we see from 1 Peter here, it's not just forgiveness. It's other things. The way we deal with other people impacts our prayer life. So I can't be selfish, right, and expect that God is going to respect my offering, that God's going to hear me, God's going to listen to me, that I'm going to get what I'm seeking because I prove myself to be selfish, right? Yeah.
To me, you kind of touched on this in our discussion, maybe inadvertently the other day, but this ties into that being sober-minded, that we need to pay attention to what baggage we're allowing ourselves to gather in life. Right. Because it doesn't say anything in here about if you forget the things that you've done, God will forgive you. It's like the idea of you have to forgive people. You can't just let it slide off your plate and be like, well, I guess never really resolved that, just kind of moved on. It's not an intentional working through the forgiveness. You need to forgive somebody so that you can be forgiven. Yeah. And I guess if we're not careful, just the nature of our finite minds, we could wind up with a lot of stuff kind of stacked up in our lives that we've never dealt with. Yeah. We could end up with brethren over here, family over there that we've just never dealt with. Yeah. I know that's starting to kind of repeat what I said in that discussion. It's startling to me to think that just through frailties and not paying attention, I could forget some of that stuff. So really it comes back deal with it in the moment. Yes, right. Deal with it right now. Before you give your gift at the altar, don't wait. I did that in 6 years. I think 6 years I'll be ready to forgive. Yeah. Do it today so that your finite mind can handle that. Yeah. I think that's Jesus' point, right?
You can't handle leaving this. One of the things that grows from leaving things unresolved is bitterness, right? And Bible deals with that, right? But the ministry of God is what? It's the ministry of what? 1 Corinthians. Reconciliation, right? And God wants not just us to be reconciled to Him, but He wants us to be reconciled to each other and for us to make things right. And so I can't just plow ahead with my life and be like, okay, well, I really need to work on my relationship with God right now. I can't really deal with the people I've hurt. And God says, no, wrong. You need to deal with the people you've hurt because that's standing in the way of your relationship with me. Now, that's not ultimately up to my, all within my control. Can't make someone forgive me, right? But I can seek reconciliation and I can do what I'm supposed to do to make it right. But to think that I can just go ahead with my relationship with God and that's not going to interfere, again, Peter really makes that clear. No, it does interfere. It does stand in the way. And so we have to be aware of that and deal with those things, again, ideally as they come up, as they happen, so we don't end up in that kind of situation. Okay. Anything else on those? Yeah, go ahead, Nona.
Yeah, in John 1, 7, it's really fascinating. It hit me a lot from the past where it says that you walk in the light as in the light.
Yeah.
Then the fellowship with another.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Jesus will cleanse all your sin. Something like conditional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost conditional where you have fellowship with one another as criteria of fruit.
Yeah.
Walking in the light as opposed to separate.
Yeah. The fellowship is in the light. The fellowship with God is in the light. Fellowship with each other is in the light. That's 100% right. And John kind of even sells the fellowship with each other. Where that he doesn't like minimize that as a minor point. Like he emphasizes that fellowship with one another and fellowship with God. All those things taking place in the light. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anything else on this one before we move on to lesson 3? Talk about some comfort. Okay. Lesson 3, comfort. Okay, so we're back in Psalms now. So we got Psalm 23 and we got Psalm 102. Psalm 23 is probably familiar. Okay, Psalm 23, David is reflecting on God's comfort, right? David is reflecting on the care that God gives for him. Okay, so from Psalm 23, what are some things we can learn about seeking comfort from God from this prayer, from this reflection, if you don't want to call it a prayer? What are some things you see? Yeah, protection. God protects us, right? God, watches over us. You think about this idea of a shepherd. That's one of the primary jobs of the shepherd is protect the flock, right? They have to protect it from animals and all kinds of things, right? So that's a primary responsibility of the shepherd, and certainly something that God does. Here's something interesting. What comforts David? What is it about God that comforts him, according to the psalm?
It's counterintuitive.
It is. What comforts him? Is it the green grass? Yeah. Is it the still waters? It's the rod and the staff. The rod and the staff comfort. What are the rod and the staff? What's the rod for? Yeah, the rod's for hitting. The rod's for hitting. Get over there, sheep. Right? What's the staff for? Yeah, corralling. You wrap it around the sheep's neck, pull it around. Okay, or maybe their leg, yank them around. Okay? So, yeah, go ahead.
It's also for rescue.
Yeah, for pulling out of things. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, what is David finding comfort in then?
He's not going to always go the right way.
Yeah.
His comfort comes from God disciplining him and corralling him, as you put it.
Yeah.
Back to the right way.
Comfort in God's guidance and correction. Comfort in God's discipline. Right? David says that's comfort for me. It's an interesting parenting thing that can't remember where we first encountered it, but we've seen it played out over and over again. Children don't want to be in charge. They don't. They're not equipped for it. And so when they're in charge, they are wild. They're unhappy because they're not equipped to be in charge. And so when an adult can come in and be like, I'm in charge, these are the rules, they take comfort in that. They're comforted by that. That craziness settles down and they feel at peace. And it seems to Bert's word earlier, counterintuitive. You'd be like, why can't you just have what you want? Because you're not equipped for it. And so when we recognize that we're not equipped to just live life on our own without God's guidance and discipline, when God applies that, we take comfort and say, okay, well, I at least know where the boundaries are. I at least know where the rules are. I know where's safe and where is not safe. Because otherwise I have no idea. Right? So taking comfort in that correction, that God cares enough about us to correct us. Right? What does the Hebrews writer say about God's correction?
Not always desirable.
Well, yeah. And what else? I'll tell you. Yeah. He disciplines the ones he loves, his real children. That's how you know. Right? I might tell many young people in this church what to do, but I only discipline my son like my son. Right? I don't discipline any of your kids like I discipline my son. Because that's my son. Right? That's different. That's a different situation. I know, one, what my authority is, and I have no offense to your kids who I love, but I have a stronger bond with him because he's my son. He's half me. Sometimes more than half me. Okay? But that legitimacy that God shows with discipline, that is love. That's one of the ways that God shows he loves us is by discipline. And the discipline does protect. Right? You hit the sheep not for fun, but so they don't go into a dangerous place. Right? You use these tools so that you can protect the sheep, because that's what the sheep needs. No, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah. Also, David, you made it very personal because he said, my shepherd.
Yeah.
Instead of the shepherd is my shepherd. Also, when that shepherd and the sheep, a lot of them they get anxious for little things like little noise again.
Mm-hmm.
So the shepherd is kind of also calm down that anxiety.
Yeah.
Yes, the shepherd protect them.
Right.
But in the day in, day out, it's just calm anxieties.
Yeah. Yeah, you go and, show some extra attention to that sheep that's getting all stressed out. So it's not so stressed out. Yeah. Calming the anxiety. Right? And part of that, right, like we see this in verse 2. Okay? Lie down in green pastures, lead me beside still waters. Right? Why do you lead a sheep to still waters? Yeah, it won't drink the fast-moving water. It's scared, right? So you bring it to a place where it can get the things that it needs, right? So this obviously about the provision of God. So David's also thinking he's comforted because he reflects, look, God has given me everything I needed, right? He took care of all the stuff, and it wasn't, we lie down in green pastures. It's abundant. What God gives, what God supplies is abundant. It's not brown pastures with a couple of things that we can eat, right? It's green pastures. There's plenty. So thinking about the comfort in that, when we are starting to feel like maybe we're not seeing the things that we want to see, that we're not getting the things that we want to get, and David here reflecting back and saying, no, God's given me more than enough. I can be okay. I can take comfort in recognizing what God has already done. Okay? But it's not just green pastures. What else? What else does he pass through?
Valley of the shadow of
Yeah. But even there, what?
Feel near.
Yeah. I won't be afraid. Okay, so again, regardless of the situation, it's easy to not be afraid in the green pastures, right? But David says, no, even in the valley of the shadow of death, even in the scary places, I'm not really afraid because I know my shepherd's with me, right? My shepherd's there, and he's got that rod and staff to keep me where I need to be, right? It's interesting also that connection between discipline and difficult times, right? That a lot of times that's where we maybe want to push away from the discipline and be like, let me just do this my way. Let me get through this the way I want to get through it. And God's like, no, this is when you need it the most. This is when you especially need to hear what I'm telling you. This is when you especially need to walk in the way that I'm directing you, because that's what's safe for you. This could be scary, but only if you're wandering off. If you're staying in the path that I've set out, then you don't have anything to be afraid of. I'm here guiding you. So thinking about that, and again, just that there's comfort in that. There's comfort in knowing that God is with us. I want to quote Footprints to you, but comfort in knowing that God is with us in the easy times and also in the hard times, right? That he's as much the shepherd and beside us in when things are going great as he is when things are going bad. So we take comfort in that. And ultimately, right, as you kind of look at this psalm as a whole, what does David take comfort in?
Dwelling in the house of the Lord forever.
Dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. Just trusting in God. Just trusting God is comforting. Just saying, I'm going to rely on God. I'm going to rely on the one with power. I'm going to rely on the one with vision. I'm going to rely on the one with an eternal perspective. I'm going to rely on the one, that loves me truthfully better than I love myself. Because if I loved myself like God loved me, I wouldn't do the things that I do. Right? Who loves me better than anyone, I can just trust him. LJ?
He chose this picture of shepherd because he understood sheep.
Right.
And if you understand anything about sheep, you understand they're pretty stupid. Isn't that really what he's saying?
Right.
He's really saying, look, I need a shepherd because I'm like a dumb sheep. Mm-hmm. I'm going to choose the wrong thing. I'm going to think I know best when I don't. I'm going to put myself in harm's way thinking it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm a dumb sheep.
Right.
That has to be my mind. I have to be humble enough to say, look, compared to the wisdom of God, I'm just dumb.
Yeah.
I need that wisdom guiding me. I need that shepherd because I'm not equipped to do it myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Dumb sheep, and not the first or last time that comparison's going to be made, right? And maybe the whole reason God even made sheep was to teach us a lesson, right? Hey, you need to see what you're like, right? That's why He made these things. Yeah. I mean, depends on who you ask. All right. So this psalm, again, this is a reflection of comfort. This is David being able to look back and say, look, I can see the comfort you've provided me. All right, so let's flip over to Psalm 102. Okay. This one's a prayer in the midst of trouble. So this is not David looking back and saying, God, you've done all this good for me. This is David in the midst of trouble. And it says, mine even has as the, kind of lead in, that it's the prayer of one afflicted. So this is David in affliction praying to God and looking here for comfort. Okay, so one, he has it. This is now where he's looking for comfort. So what do we see in this psalm, this prayer, about seeking comfort from God? The beginning of it for me, so the beginning of the psalm really kind of talks about how hard things are, right? How much difficulty he is having. But then we get to verse 12, right? He's now kind of turning his attention back to God, not about his own things, but about God. God taking action, God seeing, God, doing these things. So one of the first things that jumps out at me, just to get the ball rolling here, is verse 19. He looked down from his holy height, from heaven the Lord looked at the earth, to hear the groans of the prisoners, to set free those who were doomed to die. So one of the first things that we take comfort in is that God sees and hears. Right? Then that kind of goes along with what we were just talking about with the last lesson. We take comfort in the fact that God knows what's happening. Right? God is aware of what's happening and he cares. Okay, so God observes and God cares. What else? What else do you guys maybe see in here for comfort? Okay. Keep looking in.
God is always the same.
What's that?
God is always the same.
God's always the same. Yeah. The consistency of God. He's fully reliable. He doesn't change. Absolutely. That's not even one that I had written down, but that's a great one. Absolutely. The same part of that same verse 27, right? You're always the same. Your years have no end. Right? We can take comfort in the fact that God is eternal. That God's perspective, that what God sees is beyond what I see. Right? So in the midst of it, in the midst of the affliction, it's tough to see what's next and how it fits. Right? Because I'm living in the puzzle piece. Right? And I don't see the whole puzzle put together. I just see my little piece that I'm living in. And so it can be difficult to say, like, what is the point of this? What does this accomplish for me or for anybody else or for God's greater purpose? But when I turn to God and I recognize that he is eternal, that he does see the whole picture, right? Then I can say, oh, that's right. I can just trust you because you know what it is. And I can take comfort in that. I don't have to try and figure it out because I can't. Right? The secret things belong to God. There's no point in trying to find those secret things. They already belong to him. So he's got them. He'll take care of it. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah, part of that, God being eternal, I like the positiveness of, there's generations to come.
Yeah.
There will be generations to come that will praise you.
Yes, right. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I had is the difficulty will end. Whatever the difficulty is, the difficulty will end. The affliction will end. Now, it might end with us going to be with him forever, right? Which is not so bad. And it might end another way, right? But there's no affliction apart from eternal separation from God. There's no affliction for the faithful that doesn't end. Okay, all affliction ends. And even David is saying, look, this will end. They're going to be in Zion again. They're going to be praising God. All this stuff is going to be past. right? You know, sometimes you want to have that 1 week or 1 month fast forward button on life, and you're like, all right, if I could just get to the end of this week and then be able to look back and be like, okay, all that stuff happened. Whatever happened, it did, and now we're on the other side of it. And there's that recognition, that point will come. So we can take comfort in the fact that whatever it is, as bad as it is, it has an end. It will not go on forever. LJ.
Verse 17, he regards the prayer of the destitute and does not despise their prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it lets you know, like, there's no class level, there's no certain status level you got to be at for God to hear you.
Right.
You can be in the worst of circumstances, and God can hear you.
Yeah, absolutely.
He wants to hear you.
Right. Yeah. He wants to hear. He wants to take care of. Right. He wants us to cry out to him in these situations. David's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. Turning to God, Aaron.
Yeah, I'd say verse 13, he's compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the two characteristics about God that we cannot overlook when we're in a bad place in our life, when we're suffering, affliction.
Right.
And God doesn't want to see us suffer.
Right.
But there are certain suffering that is necessary for growth.
Yeah.
In that thing. You know, God allows certain things in our lives to help us to get to where we ought to be, you know, and so that he is compassionate. He does see those things, and when we cry out to him, he does hear us, and he is going to help us through those things. He is going to give us strength. He is going to give us the good things we need to overcome, and we don't have to worry about, oh, well, this is, you know, I guess this is it.
Right.
We'll live like this forever. Like, no, God doesn't. He sees us and he hears us and he cares about us where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he wants to show his compassion. He wants us to grow. He wants us to be disciplined, right? He wants our faith to be proven genuine, right? But again, that's all with a greater purpose, which is to make us more like him and to bring us closer to him, right? So again, even in that, there's comfort in just recognizing that, maybe the whole purpose of this is for me to learn patience. Maybe that's it. I can take comfort in that God who is in control. When you think about that story of Job, right? God who sets the limits on Satan and is like, you can't do anything except for what I allow you to do, says, okay, I'm gonna allow this temptation or this testing, this difficulty to happen, and the purpose of it is for you to grow stronger. The purpose of it is for you to learn to trust me better, right? That's what I'm after. And so you may not be able to see other things, but what you'll come out with at the end is more trust in me, right? So again, that's comforting. Okay, all of these things really we're focusing ourselves on who God is, right? So that's one of the powerful things about prayer when it comes to comfort is it forces us to acknowledge God, right? In a way that not everything does. Okay, so I can read scripture and not really pay attention, but when I'm praying to God, I really have to be thinking about who I'm talking to. And so the more that I think about who God is, which is what this prayer in this psalm shows, as David turns his attention to, oh, but you're eternal, but you hear us, but you're compassionate. When he turns his mind to all those things, then he walks away with comfort, right? Because he says, okay, I'm remembering now who it is I'm talking to. I'm remembering now what I should have my mind on, which is God, and not so much my situation, not so much my circumstances, but more thinking about God. Okay, and really, whether things are good or things are bad, we should be comforted by prayer. Like that is the natural design. It is. It's this, kind of one-sided thing where we bring our troubles to God and God gives us comfort, right? Which seems like a bad deal for God, but that's what he wants. And so we get the benefit of that we can bring all of these difficulties, whether we're reflecting back on what's happened and we can be comforted that this same God has brought us through, or when we're in the midst of it and we're just saying, okay, we're going to remember now who you are. We're going to remember now that you do love us, that we are your children, that you do want to comfort us and correct us, that we do need to grow, right? If I can remember in the midst of difficulty that I do need to grow, that I do need to be refined, right? Then I'm not going to be so stressed out about the thing that's causing that to happen, because I'm going to be like, yeah, I do need this. I need to trust God more, right? Because we're never going to get to that point where we trust him perfectly. So as we think about those things, we put our minds on those things, then I think we will find more comfort as we pray, right? Because we're going to have that opportunity to reflect more on him and less on ourselves. So we're gonna kind of stop on that question. So we're going to do questions 2 through 5 next week. But again, just as you look at the bottom of the page in that house section, right, really ask yourself this question. Are you comforted by prayer or holding on to your worries? What might you need to do differently? I want you to really think about that as you're praying this week and as you're seeking comfort, right, for the things that are going on. Really asking yourself that, especially as you're answering these other questions. All right, what am I seeing in this that maybe I'm not fully latching onto that God wants me to? I think we're going to see some really clear instruction, especially as we get into Philippians chapter 4 about that. All right, well, thanks, everybody.